Hello, hello. Testing mic. This is your captain speaking. So it's me again. And today I'm going to be walking you through my AI assisted workflow for building design system. So without further ado, let's get into it. So in the dark ages, which was the pre-AI age, in order to build a design system, you needed a team of people. And that team usually consists of your PM, product designer, your brand strategist, a UX writer in charge of copy, a front-end dev building the actual components in React or whatever library you're using. You need somebody doing QA to make sure that whatever governance rule you set for your design system, that rule is being maintained. And if you have motion as part of your system, then you need an interaction designer to build or to add motion to your components. But now, in the AI age, as a product designer who knows how to use your superpower, which is Claude code in this case, you can pretty much build a design system yourself. So what I have set up here is, for each of these rows I just mentioned, I have agents or sub-agents doing most of these things. So I have a PM agent, which is my orchestrator. Then I have a UX writing agent. I have a front-end agent or a builder agent who is in charge of building out the component and all that. But this is me just yapping. Let's just get straight into it. I'll show you, I'll give you an overview. So this video might be in two parts. I'll give you an overview. We're going to create a foundation.md file, which is basically a design token in an MD file. Then in the second video, would build out a component using Figma MCP and having that hosted either on Storybook or on Zero Height or wherever you host your design system. Yeah, but let's get into it. Okay, so right now, this is my team of agents I use when I am working on the design system or building the design system or managing a design system. So I have my PM, who is basically my orchestrator agent. I have my brand strategist and UX writer is a single agent. I have my component builder. This agent is in charge of building my components using my design tokens and whatever design principles I have set. Then if I have motion as part of my system, then I also have an agent for implementing motion. Then we also have a validator agent. This agent's primary role is to make sure that whatever we are building here and whatever we have in code, they sort of have some synergy, and it's always making sure that whatever component is being built, is being deployed, it passes through all our governance rules, which means it must be accessible, it must use semantic colors, it must use text styles, it must use our spacing scale, it must basically use all our design tokens we've defined earlier. Okay, yeah, so when I want to start a design system, I work on the foundation first, right? I define my design principles, which I usually get from my brand guide. I also hook up my brand identity, the doc itself, and my brand assets, Storybook. Then I also define where I want to document my design system, both publicly or internally. My new favorite is Mintlify at the moment. I used to use Zero Height. I haven't used it in a couple of years. So right now, Mintlify is my go-to for documenting this. I also have an agent for documentation. So yes. So first, we have the big four, which is colors, spatial, typography, and iconography. So for colors, the way I usually like to start is I want to get my core colors from my brand guide, right? In this example, my colors for my brand guide are yellow, purple, blue, teal, rose, pink, and gray. So with these colors, I am going to use a plugin called Colorbox to generate primitives for this color and save them as local variable. Remember, we are no longer in the dark ages. What would take you, usually building design foundation will take you a couple of weeks to get done, but right now you can get it done like a few hours, right? So let's say I'm working on a dummy brand guide, for example, right? I'll come to design system file. I'll launch my plugin called Colorbox. Just show you an example. So Colorbox is loading, it's loading. Let's say this is my token, for example, right? This is my token. So what I'm going to do is click on insert, and it gets inserted here, right? You can also see it's part of my variables here. Okay, so this in itself is my primitive color, right? This is what it means by primitive color. So semantic colors is basically you defining, I use basically a lot, it's you defining how your primitive colors should be used. right? So for example, I have yellow 10 to yellow 100. In my semantic color, let's go back here. I may start defining, I'll probably create a new collection called semantic. So in my semantic color, I'll start defining how my colors should be used. So I would say primary button. Let's use primary button should use library. This guy. Okay, so now I've basically defined how this should be used. So that's semantic and that's primitive colors. Why I also love color box a lot is it can also generate modes for you, right? Both light mode and dark mode, and this is automatically updated to your variables. Okay, so when I'm done defining, when I'm done generating my primitive colors and defining my semantic colors, we'll get to that later, right? For these guidelines, I'll show you how we write guidelines for how to use colors. So the next thing I want to work on is my special values, right? Values, you always want to have a rule for how you generate your special values. So my rule is usually using geometric progression, and I started my first number as A. My common difference is 2, right? So for those of you that don't like math, this is basically saying if my first number is 2 and my common difference is, my common ratio is 2, which means after 2, my next number is going to be 4. After 4, multiply by 2 again, which is my common ratio, which is 8, then 16, then 32, then 64, then 128, then 256. Now, this is if I'm feeling very crazy, 512, which I never use. Yeah. Now, this is the spacing value I am going to use across my entire product. Okay, so this special value is going to define how I use spacing in my auto layout, how my grids are defined, how my grids are also defined for breakpoints, and because I'm already using this scale, I tend to use this scale for radial. So basically, any scale that requires number is defined here and is being used here. Remember, the less options you have, the faster you make decisions. So when I'm done generating this, I use a t-shirt sizing to define my spacing. So you see I have a sample here, right? Spacing none is 0, spacing extra small, the rem value is 0.125, the pixel value is 2, and this is how I use it. Spacing excess, spacing, since I'm using t-shirt scaling or t-shirt sizing, spacing extra small, the value is 4, and I use this for small padding or icon to text gap, right? Spacing small, which is 8 pixels, I use this for components, inner padding, and small stack gaps. So basically, I have all my spacing values defined here, and I also have use cases for how I would use them. So this will come very handy when you start building and you want Claude to reference these values. So same thing for my radius system, right? I have 0, none, extra small radius 2, extra small is 4, small is 8, medium is 16, large is 32, extra large is 99999, right? I just max out the value. And this is how they would be used in products. Okay. So now that I have my special value defined and I'm using this for this, I also like defining how my grids should work for different breakpoints. Okay. So I may say, let me just write this here. So I may say for desktop, I want to have 16 columns. I want margin to be 64. Then gutter could be 32, right? But I'm usually just focusing on my margin, and gutter could be 32. And I may also go for, for tab, columns could be 16, then margin could be 32, then gutter could be 16. Then for mobile, I could say mobile using special value. Now, mobile depends on what product I'm designing, right? If it's very data heavy, I like having as much real estate on my screen as possible, so I may use 16. If it's not very data heavy and I want to have some breathing space left and right, I may use 32. So this depends on you. So for mobile, columns would be 8, margin could be 16, could be 32. Like I said, depends on you. Then my gutter could also be 16. Right. So now these values are going to inform how everything here has been generated. Easy peasy. So next, typography. For my type scale, I usually use typescale.com to generate my scale. And when I'm generating my scale, I also define what type I'll be using, right? What font family I'll be using. Am I using a single font family across products? If it's a finance product, I like having a font for body. I also like having a font for numbers. So I may use SF Pro for body and I may use SF Mono for numbers. And same thing, I also define that here and create a text style for these guys. My iconography, I just pick an icon library I like, define what style I want to use, what sizes should be used, and I'll feed that to Claude. So lately, I have been using Central Icon. Instead of have a React library, you can also hook up to Claude. For internally at the product we build at Bungie, we use Material Icon Library. Okay, there's a concept called icon subsetting, which we might get to later. And I also like defining my elevations if I am using this. If I'm not using shadows, I just define what my strokes should be. If I'm using background colors for elevation, I also define what those values should be. And I fetch these guys from my grayscale. Okay, fetch this guy from my grayscale. For my motion tokens, I like motion a lot. So for my motion tokens, I usually have acceleration and duration defined. Then I define how these values should be used. So with this, you can get your design foundation ready in 1 hour, 2 hours, depending on how fast you are and how familiar you are with this process. And this is how I create my foundation. So when I'm done building this in Figma, I have my variables ready. So what I do is I use a plugin called, I have forgotten the name, but I'll remember, I'll just search. Exports local variables. That's the name of the plugin. Internet is shitty. Yeah, so there's a plugin called export local variables or export variables. I can't remember the exact name. But what that does is exports your entire variable. Have my entire variables usually defined there, right? From spacing to all my colors to my radial values and all that. So I export that as JSON file and I feed it to Claude and create an MD file, which Claude is always going to use when my agent needs to build out a component from our Figma file, right? So I'll show you an example of how my current token file is structured. So I have it in 3 places. It's in 3 or 2 places. I think in 2 places. I have it in 2 places. So I have foundation.md, which is my entire design token. Then I have component.md, which is my components.md. But let me share an example of how my foundation.md is and how it's structured. I exported my entire file as a JSON code, and I have fed it to Claude, and it has created an MD file for me. So now this is my MD file that my agent is always going to use whenever I want to quickly prototype something in Claude. I want to build out my components in React or whatever library I'm building it. This is what it's always going to use as a source of truth. Okay, so you see I have my core colors here, yellow 50 down to 900, pink 50 down to 900, green, well, you can see all my primitive values here. Then I have semantic colors, right? So I also have a condition here. Every semantic token is an alias to a core color value. Use this in UI, never the primitives, okay? And this is also a rule I've fed to my QA agent. So before a component gets published, we always run it by Claude does this automatically, right? When it's done building, it uses the QA agent to check that component is accessible, it's using all the right tokens, and it passes all the check before pushing or committing to our GitHub. So breakpoint defined here too, so you can see them. Column, margin, gutter, this is my breakpoints. Also have them defined. These are my shadow, opacity, my Z index. This should have been entered. So these are my Z index value. So when Claude is building things, it knows that the tooltip is always at the top, the toast is below the tooltip in terms of Z index, the modal is just below the, where you see it there. Then, no, teams, accessibility, I have that all defined, but I'm coming. So I'm going to show you guys. Yes. So I have something called design to code mapping, which is basically, because this is a design system for an existing product, how the design system is being used in code and how it's being used in Figma, there's a sort of drift happening. So what this is doing here is making sure that whenever Claude is building and using our design system, in Figma, it's also making sure that it's respecting what we have in code so it doesn't break. So sign tokens foundation.md looks like. I have a component.md which I'll show you guys in the next video. This video is already long enough as it is. I think I have a lot of cutting. Yeah, but I'll create a part 2 of this where we create a component.md and I'll run you through the agents, how my agents are structured, and how those are being used when Claude is building whatever it's building for me. So yes, that is it. I will see you guys on the next one. I'll make a part 2 and I'll try to make it as hands-on and dirty as possible, which means it'll probably be a live call. I'm speaking with someone in my DM, so we'll probably have it as a live thing where we do this thing live and we'll probably use it to build this thing out. So yeah, that's it.